Hi, beautiful friends. It's Amanda here, and today we're talking about a new collection from Oden's Eye. This is the Luminous and Shadow collection. It will be available for purchase on the Oden's Eye site on September 20th. This collection contains three new blushes. These are the Shadows blushers, and there's also three highlighters. These are the Luminous Highlighters. So the Shadows blushers are going to be $20.90 US each, and then the highlighters are $22.90. And there's also this big giant palette. I think this is the largest palette that they've ever done. Although I will say I haven't been keeping up with the brand since their inception. So they may have earlier products that I just wasn't aware of that are this size, but this is a Big Daddy palette. This is the Eternal Twilight palette. There's 24 shades in here, a mix of textures. We're going to go through all of that. And this is going to be $56.90. That's US dollars. So if you are not ordering from the US, your number value may come out differently. That's why I always specify US dollars. However, I do have an affiliate code. This will give you a 10% discount on your order. So if you decide to pick any of these products up or maybe something else from the site, you can use my code Amanda. It's just my first name, Amanda, and that will save you 10% on the Oden's Eye site. But coupon codes do not apply to collaboration products, so just keep that in mind. I want to show you all of the info. I'm going to show you close-ups. We're going to do swatches. I'll show you the swatches in different lighting because there are a lot of shifts and sparkles here. So it's informative, but it's also fun. And of course, I'll show you a bunch of these products in action today. I'm wearing two different sides of the palette and also two different cheek products. I am going to be giving you all my thoughts along the way. So let's start with the cheek products first. Here are the boxes for the blushers and highlighters. I think these are just so beautiful and intricate. I love the styling that Oden's Eye does for their packaging. And these are just absolutely lovely, par for the course. And these artworks on the blushers and highlighters also match the artwork on the front of the palette. Then we see these same characters from the outer packaging reflected on the compacts themselves. These are super reflective, so sorry, I know it's kind of hard to get a good idea with my ring light that I use for filming reflecting on these, but it is the same artwork, the same characters from the boxes. And then we also see that same thing printed inside in the actual powders. So the first highlighter shade is called Dim Glow. The next highlighter is Subtle Radiance. This is the one that I'm wearing on my face. You'll get to see me apply this a little bit later on in the tutorial portion. And then the last highlighter is called Gentle Firefly. These are all super sparkly and reflective, and they all have a pretty strong duochrome type shift. I'm sort of showing you here in the mirror, but you'll also be able to see it in all the different swatches and the different lighting situations that I'm going to show you. Let's do some live swatches of these cheek products so that you can really see what they look like going on and get a sense for the texture. These are quite glittery. They're very strong, sparkle heavy. This is not that ethereal lit from within glow. This is a straight up sparkly, super glittery type of highlighter product. Personally, this isn't the type of highlighter that I tend to prefer, but the way that these shift and shimmer and the way that they are incredibly foily, if you layer them up, they can be quite opaque. So I see myself using these highlighters on my eyes more than on my face. These would also be very pretty on the body if you were doing like a cosplay or a costume or something like that, where, or honestly, maybe that's just your everyday. You want a body glitter every day. I was a kid in the 90s and the early 2000s, so I'm definitely not here to judge a body glitter look.
I think these would be more useful on the eyes or the body for me personally. They are a lot more subtle with just the overhead light. That's just like the regular light bulb that's in this room. And they're more intense with the flash. You can really see that base a lot more with the flash or with the direct light, like the ring light. But the overhead light, the base seems a lot more transparent. Even though these aren't perfect for me, they are very cool and beautiful, and I'm sure they are perfect for somebody. Now we're moving on to the blushers. The first is called Glow Powder. I'm sure you can see why. This is also very glowy and very shimmery, but it has a much more opaque base color. And then the other two blushers are completely matte, no shimmer, no sparkle, no overspray, nothing like that. Radiant Flame is a super deep pink, and then Luminous Heat is a very bright, vibrant, almost neon peach. I wanted you to see both of these side by side because I think in photos they may look really similar, but when you see them side by side, and especially when you see them applied to the skin, they are quite different. Here in the live swatch, you can see that Glow Powder has a much stronger pink base. You get more coverage from that one. And Radiant Flame is very matte, very, very pigmented. I think this is the most pigmented of the three blushes. Luminous Heat is almost the same texture, but it did need a little bit more layering up to get to that same opacity. I can't quite put my finger on the names, but these two matte blushes really remind me of some NARS matte blushes that I've seen in the past. Radiant Flame reminds me of that red NARS blush. I think it might be called Exhibit A. Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments. This one's a little bit more pinky, but in general, it has that same feeling to me. Here are the blushes in the overhead light. Now it's really apparent that that Glow Powder shade has a much less transparent type base. And I didn't do a flash because these don't really have much to offer in a flash swatch, but I do want to show you what this matte blush looks like on my cheeks. I'm starting with the more corally one first, and I am just lightly applying it because these are quite intense, and I know that I want to layer these blushes together. If you're looking for a softer look, you can definitely achieve that, especially if you use a less dense brush. Like I'm using this very fluffy little brush that just picks up a little bit of that pigment at a time. And layering Radiant Flame on top really sealed the deal for me. I loved the way that this looked. I loved the way that these two colors worked together and created some depth in that blush application. These are super gorgeous, definitely my favorites of the cheek products. I also had to go for the highlighter. I'm going to do a very icy eye look on this side. So I decided to do no blush and just go straight for the highlighter. I was shocked by how this basically was just a huge amount of glitter. Basically, instantly, I barely tapped my brush into this highlighter. So I wasn't expecting to pick up quite this amount of glitter. So you could tell I'm kind of like flabbergasted a little bit, like trying to figure out if I need to try to fix this. And I decided to just roll with it. We're going full force into the glittery face today, even though it's not necessarily my go-to look. Now let's look at the Eternal Twilight palette. Here we see the same characters from the front of the cheek product packaging. I love the subtlety of the different sort of ombre colors and all the different metallic accents, and I just think it's so beautifully done. Now, I do want to point out that the sleeve of the palette has the ingredients listed on the back. The actual palette itself is the same on the front, but on the back of the palette are just the shade names. So I always recommend keeping the sleeve for reference, especially if you do have any sensitivities or allergies it's just good to have that information available. When we open up the palette inside, there is an oddly shaped but still quite large mirror. Lots more beautiful metallic accents. I love this sort of silky smoke pattern on the backgrounds of the palette, and then two distinct sides, one very warm toned peach and pink type of side, and then a definitively more cool toned sort of grays and blues. There's some gorgeous pops of green and purple too, which, if you know me, then you know green and purple are two of my favorite eyeshadow colors. So I always like seeing those show up in any eyeshadow palette. There are some little printed accents in some of the eyeshadows. This is something we see a lot from Oden's Eye. It's always a detail that I appreciate. And there are quite a few different textures within the shimmers. So this palette is half matte, half shimmer. All of the mattes are just their straight up regular velvety matte formula. There's no sequin, glittery matte shades, but a lot of the shimmers have different textures. Some are just straight up regular metallic, some are more foily and have that kind of chunky feeling to them. Those things will be more apparent in the swatches. I also wanted to give you a size reference for this palette because it is quite a bit larger just based on the pan layout inside here. So here's the Hella palette. The Hella palette is the standard size of their other 16 pan eyeshadow palette. So you can see bumping up to 24 pans made this significantly larger. But let's see this palette in action. I'm going to start with the luminous side first, and I'm going to, of course, use the same side that I put that warm toned blush on. And then we're going to do a more cool toned icy look on the side with the sparkly highlighter. I'm going to prep both of my eyes with my favorite eye base. It's the Ulta Matte Eye Primer. So I'm just swiping that on quickly. I typically tend to start my eye looks with a matte shade in the crease area for a bit of a transition shade. So I'm using Daylight first and just really gently building that up into my crease. I'm not being too precise with this step because I know that I'm going to be doing a lot of layering and blending. I also took that same shade and smudged it along the lower lash line as well. Now I'm going to use this really bright pinky coral shade. I was nervous that this would be kind of dry or patchy because bright neon shades can tend to be that way, but I was pleasantly surprised with how smooth the consistency of this shadow was. Added a bit of that shade to the lower lash line as well, and I'm very intrigued by this tie-dyed looking shade. This is one of the shimmers that is quite that squishy, foily, I don't want to say chunky because it goes on smoothly, especially with the fingertip application. These shades don't tend to be great with a brush in my experience, but when applied with a fingertip, they work really well and they don't have a chunky texture when they're applied. It's just when you touch that pan, it isn't a super smooth, ultra metallic type of shimmer. It is kind of squishy feeling, almost like a super shock shadow. Then I decided to be super extra and just go for it. So I took this bright pinky duochrome shade. I added that to my brow bone highlight, but then I connected it down onto my cheek as well and made that in sort of a C shape so that it was highlighting my brow bone and my cheekbone. I thought this was a really cool look. It worked well to tie the blush and the eye look together. And I thought this was really fun and flattering. I can see myself using this technique again with these products. So it was a fun little whim of a choice there. Now let's go to the other side and do something decidedly more cool toned. I'm using the shade Escape first, and this one is a very light pastel-y white based type of shade. So I did find that I needed to go back over it a couple times to get the color intensity that I wanted. But first of all, I was able to achieve that. And second of all, it stayed really nice and smooth on my eye. Again, I was expecting something a little bit patchy or lackluster. That can also happen a lot with pastel shades. And I found that this one blended really beautifully and it worked so well with this blue gray periwinkle shade. The way that these two eyeshadows blended together just made the most gorgeous, soft periwinkle type of base for my eye look. Now I'm using the shade Void, which looks really blue in the pan, but looks a lot more silver once it's applied to the skin. And I love a really bright, bold, silvery eye look. So I was really loving that. Then, I just wanted to play with more sparkles because that's how I am. So I added this purpley shade to the inner corners of both the upper and lower lash lines to mimic what I did on the other eye. And then, why not add even more sparkles? I was going for full Elsa at this point, so I added that to my brow bone as well to complete a super icy eye look, and again, to mimic what I had done on the other side. That way, my finished look would feel balanced, even though I didn't use the same colors and the same tones. I like to try to use the same technique for two different eye looks to give myself that sort of sense of balance, I suppose. Then I curled my lashes, added my L'Oreal Panorama mascara, and those are the finished eye looks. I think they're both super pretty. They were easy to achieve. All the shadows performed beautifully for me. I can definitely see myself wearing these same looks again. And I'm also excited to try some more of the shades that I didn't use in the video today, but I think are just really drawing me in this palette, particularly the bright green and the deep, rich, shimmery blue shade. I love a jewel tone. I love a moody, kind of grungy eye look. So I think those are next on my list to experiment with. But these turned out really lovely. I'm very happy with the performance and the finished looks. So now I think it's time for a whole bunch of palette swatches. I am going to do the two halves separately so that I don't have too many swatches all crammed in on my arm because I want to show you the finger swatches and brush swatches. I want you to be able to have a very distinct sense of all of these shades and textures. But I will show you a complete swatch at the very end so you can see the entire palette color story together. So I showed you finger swatches and brush swatches in the first round. Now we're going to do a close-up look so that you can really see these different textures and you can have each shade labeled. Luminosity, Balder, and Illusion are the really squishy, foily type of shadows, and the rest of the shimmers are more of that standard, I guess, metallic shade. Although some are more opaque than others, but texture wise, you'll know what to expect with those. Here are these shades in overhead lighting and, of course, flash lighting. These look so beautiful with that in motion, kind of indirect spotlight type of look. I just think this palette really lends itself to all of these different lights and shadows. If the palette was just this color story, I don't think I would find it very exciting, even though it performs well. The textures are quite lovely. But at least for me, it's the contrast of the warm and cool shades that I think really draws me in. And I absolutely love some of these shades, particularly a couple of these shimmers are just right up my alley. That very center swatch, it looks like this gunmetal gray from afar, but when you see the close-up swatch, you'll be able to see the individual blue and gold shimmers because this is the tie-dyed, kind of foily tie-dyed shade on this half of the palette. I love the way that it reads as a really deep smoky gray, but when you look at it closely, you can see all of the individual colors in there. I just think that is so interesting, and it definitely isn't like any other eyeshadow I have in my collection. So I'm always happy when I get to say that aloud because I've got a lot of eyeshadows in my collection. So getting surprised by something is always a joy for me. I think this half of the palette is more striking in the overhead light than the warmer side. And I mean, these sparkles coming through with the flash are just so yummy to me. I do think that some of the lighter shades in this palette, in the shimmer formulas, do tend to be a little bit too similar for me. I do wish there was a little bit more variety in those lighter shimmer shades. They're not exactly the same, any of them, but I do think that a few of them are a little bit closer than I prefer on both sides of the palette. I do think we could have benefited from a little bit more variety in those lighter shimmers. Here is the whole palette swatched together. This is a really striking juxtaposition. And I do find myself thinking that in general, this palette is more light than dark. So maybe even that warm toned side could have had a super, super dark red or maybe a really deep magenta or something just to give us a bit more contrast since contrast is the theme. But overall, I really like it.
As far as the cheek products go, I definitely prefer the matte blushes over the more shimmery cheek products. That's just a personal preference. I just don't really like a super glittery look on the face. But if that is something that you like, that is fitting with your aesthetic and your desired outcome for a cheek product, then you're probably going to love these. They're definitely very fairy dust. That's just not what I personally prefer. I definitely prefer the matte blushes, and I think that these really bold matte colors are really pretty. I think they're going to look pretty on a lot of people, a lot of different skin tones. So I prefer the mattes over the shimmers for the cheek products, but they're all very pretty. The packaging is very pretty. I'm a sucker for a pretty powder compact. If you follow me on Instagram, you already know that. As for the palette, I have a feeling that my thoughts on this palette will probably be a pretty common sentiment. I don't know. I'm obviously filming this before this product has been announced, so I don't know what anybody else thinks about this yet. As much as I enjoy seeing a brand do something different, and this is different for Oden's Eye, this is a large palette for them, and I like seeing brands switch things up while still staying true to their brand identity, which I think they've done a really good job with this Eternal Twilight palette. I kind of wish that they had released these as two separate palettes and then maybe design them so that they like fit together or something. I don't know. The way that it's laid out with these like staggered columns makes the packaging larger than it necessarily has to be. I do like that there's a really big mirror. I like the colors in here. I like the shade performance. I like the idea. My main critique is I wish that it was split into two different palettes, that you had the option to purchase one or the other or both. That would have been a little bit more customer friendly and more budget friendly. But I still think this is really cool. I think it's beautiful. I love the concept. I always love their packaging. And, it performs up to the standard that I expect from Oden's Eye, which is a very high bar. So even though I have some critiques or things that I would have done differently, I still think this is a good palette. And if you're drawn towards this concept, you like a big palette, you're really into this idea, I think you're going to love it. I definitely don't dislike it. I find myself a little bit more drawn towards this cool toned side. I love these super rich, sparkly jewel tone colors. I'll definitely get use out of this bright, warm, toasty, almost neon sunset kind of side. But I do find myself more drawn towards this cooler tone side. But overall, I think this is really pretty. It's a cool idea. And I'm always down for more Oden's Eye makeup. I do generally enjoy their releases. So I would love to hear what you think about this collection. Are you interested? Are you going to be picking any of this stuff up? Maybe waiting for Black Friday? I always love to hear what you think about things too. So make sure you leave all your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye. Shameless self-promotion. Oh, it is so glittery. Uh, uh, the particles. Why? No, no, no. I don't like it. Okay. The matte blush is so pretty, but the glittery, like, look, when you just look at me straight on, you can just see it. It's not for me. It's just not for me. If you love glittery highlighters and this is for you, and that, I'm so happy for you. I love that for you. But this, to me, it's not what I'm looking for. It's not what I want. It's not what I need. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Forgot to put my rings on again. Sorry. Still married. Get you a girl that can do both. Cozy from the Enchanted Autumn collection. Oh my gosh, this glitter is killing me. Just that I wish that it had spent. I got my little silvery leaf earrings on. They really go well with this eye look. I cannot wait to take this off of my face. The sparkle, it's just not for me. If it's for you, then I doesn't mean I don't love your face. I will love your sparkly face forever and ever. I just don't want my face to be sparkly. And I think that's okay. All right, I'm ready for some lunch. I'm hungry. I'm glittery. I'm hungry. And I need some caffeine. That was a lot of complaints, but I promise I'm actually doing pretty well. It's just, human bodies require maintenance. Please don't hate me if you're a glitter lover, but ooh, thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you really soon. I'll be here. I hope you'll be here. It'll be a fun time. We'll be together. I'm gonna go make some snacks now. Love your face. Bye.